Attention Sleepless Knights. Thank you for consuming this OSI 74 product broadcast, live from the Black Knight satellite. For optimum performance and safety, your host, Mr. Lobo, asks that you please listen to these instructions carefully. When in a hospital or other healthcare facility, observe the restrictions on the use of electronic devices. Switch off before boarding an aircraft to prevent interference with communications systems. Do not operate this device in the presence of flammable gases or fumes, chemical plants, or where blasting operations are in progress. Always listen hands-free while driving a vehicle. Failure to observe these instructions may lead to immediate termination. It's time now for the show to begin. Thank you. Have a very pleasant evening.
You're not dreaming. You're listening to the Sleepless Knights podcast. I am your host, Mr. Lobo, and we are still in a dystopia beyond our control, a world beyond imagination, where Paul is still floating out in space in a life pod, and the entire world has been overrun by apes. But unfortunately, Planet of the Apes is no longer owned by 20th Century Fox. It is now owned by Disney. And I have just received a very strongly worded letter that affects both of us. It affects me, Mr. Lobo. It affects Paul Sanders of Bestow TV, who is still floating in space. Paul, we are no longer to be controlled by apes in a planet of apes.
Well, then I got this lobotomy for nothing?
You might still need it by the end of this podcast. Oh. But apparently Disney owns Planet of the Apes now, and so if we're to continue with this canon of our show, we have to now be 25% different than a Planet of Apes. So apes is a 4-letter word, so 25% of that would be changing one letter essentially. So we are now being it's a planet of Abes. Planet of Abes. So we've got Abraham Lincolns everywhere herding people into cages. And they're the ones performing the lobotomies now. They've got the tall stovepipe hats, and they're got the funny Amish beards, and they're marching along with their string ties, and they're cutting logs and making more cages to round up the rest of the humans. And that's the world we live in. That's the dystopia that we are being subjected to now, while you're floating in space. Yeah.
I mean, I still can mesh in. I kind of could have meshed in pretty well. I was very good at picking fleas before, but even with the apes, the apes still need to pick fleas. I assume that
maybe out of their beard.
That is not a dead industry. I'm pretty sure that that's still around. But I've always had the beard, so all I need is the hat, which will cover that scar on my head.
You have a scar? Oh, yeah, from the lobotomy. Yeah, right. Yeah,
I got a lobotomy? Is that what? Who got a lobotomy? What?
Oh, never mind, Paul. Never mind. As you were, continue with your thread. So,
right.
So it's not apes. Not apes, it's abes.
So, how did this happen? Everybody, this somebody tuning into this podcast, they're not going to know what happened. There's nothing. So, we need more backstory. What happened? How did the Abes take over?
How did the Abes take over? Well, they're clones, obviously. So they had to have the original head of Abraham Lincoln. Was frozen, and the head of Abraham Lincoln was frozen, and it was being kept at Area 51, which the apes had broken into. Wait, and they had taken the what? What's that, Paul?
It can't be Area 51. This has to be 25% different, doesn't it?
25. Yeah. So what's 25% different than 51?
All right, hold on. So carry the 1, divide by 2, multiply by pi, 63.75.
Okay, so they break into area 63.75.
Yeah, you have to go to 63.75. If you go to area 64, you want too far. Turn around, come back.
That's right. Go on back. I think area 64 is a little shack across the street.
Love shack.
The Love Shack, baby.
Little old place where we
I
can
got
get
me
together.
a Lincoln. It's as big as a whale.
Whoa!
And it's about to set sail.
Lobster. Oh, wait.
Wrong song.
Oh.
So they get in their Lincoln and they get the head of Lincoln and they drive to the Love Shack at area 63.75 and they get the head of Abraham Lincoln and they start making clones, and then it quickly gets out of control because the Abes end up taking over, and that's the world we live in now. A planet of Abes, Paul. Planet of Abes.
So you mean my chimp bucks are no longer valid? I mean, it didn't even last 30 days. You told me this was going to last 30 days.
You should have spent it when you could, because now you can't use your chimp bucks.
So I guess now I got to wait for another letter, and I'm sure I'm going to get some Abe bucks. Which are probably what $5 bills and pennies.
$5 bills and pennies. You can buy yourself some Lincoln Logs. Exactly right.
Why would I want to buy Lincoln Logs? I can make Lincoln Logs. Just give me enough of the Nana corn chips, and in about an hour.
Yeah, drop them in your Folgers can. Yeah. Oh no, that's awful. Yeah, let's not talk about your Lincoln Logs anymore on the program.
So. What does this what does this relate to for the rest of the episode? I mean, what exactly are you hinting at?
I am glad you asked, Paul. I am
I only asked because it's written right here in front of me.
I am maybe perhaps 25% glad that you asked that. I think a lot of what happens in franchises and a lot of what happens to the canon of properties that are is that there needs to be changes made to the property. Whoever the new owner is, they don't want to pay whoever owned it before, or whoever the new the person who controls the intellectual property or maybe owns the name. They have to, so that they can claim it for themselves. They will often are legally bound to change the property by 25%, and this happens across a lot of popular genres and shows in fandom. We see a lot of things different we're talking about Godzilla last week. When they made the Godzilla in the late 90s, they weren't allowed to make it look like Godzilla. It had to look different than Toho's version of Godzilla. So it had to be more than 30% different in that case. And again, we were talking about who's the person who decides what, because it's a subjective thing. How do you decide something creatively? How can something creatively be 25% difference, 25% more, 25% less? And how do you even know? And usually the person who makes that decision is the person who is either going to sue you if you don't do it right, or someone who is your competitor. So you almost have to create something in satisfaction of someone who is not in your best interest, right? Is that it?
Sure.
Did I do that? Is that right? Lawyers, I guess, are probably the people sometimes. Sometimes it's your own lawyers. Sometimes it's someone else's lawyers. I think that when Disney or whoever, they have a new property, and I think that my understanding with the Star Wars movies, which we brought up last week, is that a lot of the major characters from Star Wars, the original film, were either controlled by 20th Century Fox or they were owned by Lucas. And even though they had bought the name Star Wars and the franchise Star Wars and were able to expand on that universe, there were certain characters that they still were beholden to pay royalties on. So it was much easier for them to eliminate or try to eliminate those characters in favor of new characters, or try to eliminate old ideas in favor of new ideas, not for a creative reason, but because they don't want to pay somebody.
And didn't we also, not just Lucas, but didn't we at one time think that Fox still owned the rights to the original Star Wars? So by the time we get The Force Awakens, they had to make even further changes where maybe we can't refer to Jakku anymore, or we can't refer to Tatooine anymore. It has to be Jakku. We can't see the stormtroopers as they are. They have to look like ducks now.
The mighty duck stormtroopers, right?
When you see the Death Star, it seems to be a little awkward because it's not exactly upright anymore, or
it's the
so
upside
forth.
down. There's no right side up in space.
That's
It's the
true.
upside
That's
down
true.
Death Star,
and even down to like the aliens. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but like all the aliens like had major changes where you don't really have like the bug-like Rhodians and so on. The hammerheads and everything else.
Yeah.
Where you have more of a different type of aliens that you've never seen before.
Yeah, sort of weird, generic. I guess we're calling them generic, but yeah, aliens that have not been introduced before, or seen, or aliens not seen in the original Star Wars film.
Right. Do you mind if we toss the commercial? Because I think I'm about ready to push out a log cabin right now.
Oh gosh, can we? I think we need to fire all the writers in this first break and start over fresh,
Or at least 25% of them.
we're going to fire 25% of our writers, and we'll be right back with more Sleepless Nights of Insomnia.
History prefers legends to men. It remembers the battle, but forgets the blood. However, history remembers me before I was a president. It shall only remember a fraction of the truth.
Vampires have been in the New World for centuries, Mr. Lincoln.
It's time we had a nation of our own.
I shall kill them all.
This film is not yet rated.
And we're back with more Sleepless Nights of Insomnia. We figured out that getting rid of 25% of our writers meant cutting out another 25% of Paul's brain, I think, is how we ended up resolving that. So there's been, we already had the wound there from the lobotomy, and we just kind of continued with that same attack there. And I think that now we're down to, I think we're right at the levels we need to be to make this podcast 25% different than it was before the break.
And it's like I got into some really nice deep thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole structure, the whole future of Sleepless Nights is now open to me. And I can say, that going here forward, we can totally talk about, I like applesauce.
Great, Paul. I like applesauce too. So the only thing I can think of that's more nerdy than applesauce is Star Trek. Star Trek, of course, is probably one of the most robust franchises that we have here in the United States. A popular series in the 1960s, an animated series in the early 70s, a movie in the later 70s that made a ton of money but was critically panned, and then almost rebooted with the second movie, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which was enormously popular. And then launched a series of films in the 80s with the original cast from the TV show. And in parallel to that, in the 80s, we also had the premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Mm-hmm. And just like Star Wars, there's kind of a visionary that's sort of the auteur that people relate or assign the whole creation of Star Trek to, and that's Gene Roddenberry. And Gene Roddenberry had kind of very specific sort of rules. He had kind of a specific universe, a universe of diversity, a universe of cooperation, not a lot of conflict, a hard show to write for because, there's not a lot of, he kind of thought that in the future we'd be less barbaric, that we would negotiate more, we would use our brains more, we'd be more sophisticated. I always loved it on Star Trek whenever like they'd play rock and roll or something, they would be like, oh, my virgin ears, what am I hearing? It's like they were somehow, we're talking about Superman last week. It's like they were Supermen, it was like it was sort of utopian where, the crew of the Enterprise were sort of like our future selves that were sort of we've set aside the entire planet Earth is at peace, and we've all settled our differences, and now we're all exploring space together. That's kind of like a very uncynical, hopeful kind of story to try and tell in the 60s and 70s when people were very cynical and very down on the government and down on the military and down on everything, and to come out and try to tell these very optimistic, kind of far-reaching stories and having all of this cooperation and peace throughout the galaxy, unless it was like, the Klingons or Bones, which they always made out those guys seem backward for their kind of clinging to the old ways, clinging on to the old ways. So anyhow, so Star Trek: The Next Generation. Where would you take this? I just was trying to set up the original Star Trek, and I know that you had a lot to say about how that series changed as we went forward.
I mean,
right?
you go. We end up like flash. Can I have that 25% back? And fix my tongue. Let me try that again. Take two. Mm-hmm. We fast forward to the 90s a little bit, and you get Star Trek where it kind of is flourishing in a whole bunch of series. You get Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, along with the Next Generation film franchise. And whether you love them or hate them, I mean, not every single one of those were perfect. Some had their problems, some had their issues, but they thrived. They were an entity. They were making, to a degree, money. They were making a company money. But somewhere along the lines, a new executive took over, and their vision was that they just don't get sci-fi. They don't understand that sci-fi, or they didn't like sci-fi, or one of the above options, and they axe it in its prime.
Wow. So this is like the other reason why things go bad, right? And because usually it's greed that ruins the thing, but sometimes it's ego, where a new person comes in and goes, yeah, I don't like that, so I'm just going to do away with that because that's going to represent my regime. That was somebody else's thing, and now I'm the new guy, and this is my studio, and we don't do this kind of thing.
I mean, it's kind of odd because even bring it to the present day where The Evil Dead had a successful series. I mean, I love that series. I don't know if you got to check out any of it.
Ash versus the Evil Dead was, I thought, brilliant and very engaging and fun and good television. Yeah, absolutely.
And then a new executive took over there. I think Starz produced that show. So a new executive took that over and was like, well, I don't like horror, and kills the franchise in its prime. I mean, that was from all my understandings, that was making them money. And it's just like, to me, it's like, if it's making money, whether you get it or not, can't you just sit down, shut the fuck up, and count your money?
Yeah, it's
just
right.
Let the money roll in. Just let them do their thing.
Right. It's funny because, again, it's the opposite of what we were talking about last week, where people were like, okay, well, we want to make money, so we're going to change this thing that doesn't need to be changed. And then this is the opposite of that, where you have something that's working, and they're changing, they're doing away with something that's actually working, because it's not their idea.
I mean, I guess they need that 47th spin-off of CSI and that 34th house knockoff of a doctor with some sort of disability who solves the day, but screw fantasy, sci-fi, or anything, any horror or anything that is different. Let's just serve the baseline. Yeah, right. And 5 more reality shows and another lawyer show, and yes, of course. And so then they did away with all of the. So what happens then? So then there was a long dormant period where there wasn't new Star Trek product, and then of course that's probably what happened when the reboot happened. Well, somewhere along the lines, and I don't know if this happened during the 90s. I don't know the exact time. But when Viacom acquired both CBS and Paramount, that is the parent company, somehow the Star Trek franchise somehow became only a part of CBS.
Okay.
So despite them being under the same umbrella, when Paramount wanted to make a new movie, they had to pay licensing fees to CBS within their own company to even make another movie. So we kind of get to the J.J. Abrams movie of 2010, I believe.
Yeah. All right. With the Beastie Boys and
2009 is when it came out. So you get
lens flares and Beastie Boys. There's a lot more to it than that, but yes, that the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, which I did enjoy.
Actually the whole franchise. The second one has a little bit of bumps, but the franchise as a whole was pretty good. And
I thought Beyond was my favorite of the three. Honestly, I thought Star Trek Beyond was very fun. I enjoyed
love Beyond, and for some reason they classify Beyond as a failure, even though it made buku bucks. Mm-hmm. But this is where this like 25% kind of comes in, where if you kind of look into it and everything, where CBS licenses it to Paramount, but the movie has to be 25% different. It can't be like the original cast. It can't retell any of the original stories, or if it retells the stories, it has to be 25% different. Mm-hmm. And that's where the film franchise kind of developed the Kelvin timeline, where it's like, all right, you can have everything that happened in the original series, which is awesome. Last episode we were talking about like a toxic fan base. That fan base, whether they're toxic or not, if it's that Star Trek fan base, can be fine with this because it doesn't touch that origin stories. Like that canon stays intact, and instead you get the alternate universe, the Kelvin timeline, where they do everything that's 25% different. They blow up Romulus, and they blow up Vulcan in the series. So it's drastically changed. They're not going back. That timeline is not going back because huge elements of that series is forever different. And it's kind of fun because this opens up all the possibilities of a new adventures. But again, you get this 25% different. Like what defines 25% in the Star Trek universe?
I suppose the costumes had to be different again. I suppose the characters needed to be slightly different. Their relationships to each other needed to be slightly different. The ship, with the way the Enterprise looks, had to be slightly different, right? All of those things probably add up to what's 25% different. But what is interesting in this is that, at least in Star Trek, you've already established the mirror, or is it mirror, where they have the parallel universe? I think that is the Star Trek episode.
I think so.
You already established in Star Trek that parallel universes exist and alternate timelines exist, even within the Star Trek that had happened before the J.J. Abrams reboot. We've already introduced this idea that alternate timelines exist. So it is a kind of a cool way to where, okay, well, that's that Star Trek and all of that is intact, but this is a different Star Trek with different versions of all these characters that right? But somehow the same.
Right.
And I think that in their version, I think that actually worked, but they weren't making any money, right? Because all of the merchandising belonged to CBS still, right?
Because it's really weird because in the film universe, they consider merchandising a part of the success. And even though the money made movie, give me a second here, I can bring it up.
Or the movie made money.
Yeah, either or. Yeah. The budget was $150 million, and they made $385 million, and they were still like considered losses because I guess the merchandising went to CBS. CBS had made exceptions where it's like, well, you can make the toys. Toys have to be 25% different, but at the same time, while we're producing these toys for the movie, we're going to release stuff of the original lineup, and a buying audience, they're probably going to lean more to things that they're familiar with versus something, a new film franchise is going to introduce new concepts that they're not necessarily know that they're going to be into. Which is a common audience going to go to? Are they going to go to, the remold of Kirk and the two pack of Kirk and Picard, or the brand new Kirk and Spock that they know nothing about?
That they know nothing about, right? And probably those toys with the original characters, they could put those toys out before the other ones get a chance to come out, and so they're what do you call it? They're striking them. They're there's a word there where you snatch in before the other person,
Sniping.
Sniping. Yeah, I think that's the word. But
And I'm the one with 25 less the brain.
This kind of is getting off track just a tiny bit, but in the, I think it was the late 80s, could be the early 90s, but Filmation did a version of Snow White, and the Snow White hadn't come out in a long time. Disney's Snow White had not been in theaters for a decade, so they just did a different version of Snow White, and just before it was supposed to be released, Disney put out the original Snow White again in theaters, and of course that just wiped it out. It's just like there'd be no reason for anyone to go see the new Snow White, and I think that that's a common practice, and it's funny to think that two people who were supposed to be on the same side would be doing that to each other.
Isn't that the kind of the idea with Asylum too, where Asylum always does their mock busters?
Yeah, and it usually comes out a month before the big budget one or something. Yeah, like I think Snakes on a Train made money, where the original film Snakes on a Plane lost money.
Right.
So so it's interesting, with as famous as the movie was, Snakes on a Plane, the mockbuster was more successful because it was a cheaper film to produce, so they had much higher profit ratio, and they got to ride all of that attention and energy. Every time there's a sequel or a reboot or a reimagination in general, it always draws attention to the original product. The original product always gets a boost. When War of the Worlds comes out, every other prior version of War of the Worlds gets a little boost. And I think that just like Star Trek, when there's a new Star Trek movie coming out, just like with that new Godzilla movie that's coming out, people are like, and again, it's this love of canon, right? We're going backwards and going, okay, well, I'm getting ready for this new thing coming out. I wanna buy all the old stuff. And it's possible to even get burned out on the thing that you're anticipating before it even comes out.
So basically all the Abe bucks are going to the wrong allotment.
And they want all your Abe bucks. And maybe that's part of their motivation of not sticking to the canon or changing things a lot. And so that for some reason there's someone else doesn't get a portion of the pie that they think is for themselves. Maybe that is part of the motivation of changing it.
And then we'll fast forward even further, where CBS, you got your whole streaming service, and CBS is streaming brand new episodes. Was it Discovery? I think is one of them, and Picard's the other.
Yeah, Discovery was interesting because fans had a real super negative reaction to Discovery when it came out initially, and then there were like a sort of a clutch of people who really love Discovery. Right? There's kind of like both, because it's so different than anything that come before. Right?
Yeah, but it was weird because when they came out, they were supposed to be following the Kelvin timeline that was set forth by the movies. But because they went back to CBS, they have to be 25% more different.
So it was already 25% different than the original timeline in the Kelvin timeline, and now we're 25% different than the Kelvin line. So now we're 50%. We're only half Star Trek now.
Half Star Trek. Well, I mean, I guess I haven't seen them, but I've watched reviews and stuff of them, and a lot of them pretty much refer to Discovery as Star Trek light, and I guess Picard's more like Blade Runner light.
Yeah, a little bit of Blade Runner light, a little bit of sci-fi's Battlestar Galactica series light too. Yeah.
So I guess that's what happens when you get a 50% change of.
So you've got, and then does Picard have to be again another 25% different than the 50% different?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
You took out that analytic part of my brain. I can't math that right now.
Okay, all right. Well, I think it's interesting because I feel like we are in this place, especially with Star Trek. I mean, have you seen Picard? Have you watched Picard?
I haven't watched Picard, although I heard that a lot of the episodes are now free to stream or watch on YouTube or whatever. So
because of all the Abes taking over, they figure a lot of people are at home.
I kind of have an interest in it, but I kind of don't have an interest in it because it's like the central.
They're in their cabins.
It's the central character who's how many years old now, And like, how do you do an action movie where the guy's like a bajillion years old, like the central character's a bajillion years old? Like he's not doing tumbles on the top of the roof, you know. They're firing at him and he's walking as fast as he can with his walker.
Yeah, but Picard was always sort of, I guess, a fatherly sort of figure. I mean, Riker kind of did all the muscle for Picard on the old Star Trek. You know, I mean, I felt like Picard's character was always sort of cerebral anyway. I think my problem with that show is not Patrick Stewart, because whenever he's on the screen, I'm fully engaged because I just like him.
Yeah. Well, Patrick Stewart's awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, but the whole show's riding on that. I don't like any of those other characters and I don't care about them. And I don't think of Star Trek as being a soap opera. And I feel like this is a soap opera being presented to me as an adventure, and I don't feel like I'm having an adventure. I feel like I'm watching a soap opera, and I feel like that these characters are more crass. They're less refined. They're not likable, and you know, Star Trek. You know, again, it's like Superman is a sort of idyllic kind of story. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, people don't act like Superman. That's the point. He's a kind of person that we would aspire to be. And this kind of the people of the original Star Trek were kind of characters that you wanted to be like, not because you identified with them, but because they were role models. You were like, wow, I wish I could be that cool, or I wish I could be that smart. You know, no one can be as smart as Spock, but maybe if I study really hard and I'm real focused, I could come close. You know, but I feel like the flaws of these characters and the grittiness of this characters of trying to do like a gritty reboot of Star Trek, for me, it's not that it's bad. It's just I feel like I'm not the audience anymore. I feel like they're making this show for an entirely different person. You know, and so I feel excluded because I am not relating to these characters because, you know, they just seem like douchebags to me.
With that note, it sounds like that's a word from our sponsor, right?
Yes, Grandpa Nana's thick and hearty douchebags
and corn chips.
Incorporated. That's the best we can do with 25% less brain power.
Corn chip flavored douche.
Oh, Lord. We will be back with more of this garbage right after this.
This is Mr. Lobo, your movie host for Alpha Video. Did you realize that Alpha Video is the leading manufacturer and marketer of budget-priced classic movies and television shows on DVD? We have over 4,000, that's right, 4,000 active titles available on DVD, and we maintain aggressive release schedule, very aggressive. I mean, we're a little mean about it sometimes, maybe pushy. Maybe mean is too strong of a word, maybe a little pushy. But you know, there's so many mamby-pamby distributors out there that aren't aggressive enough in their DVD distribution. We're tilting the balance the other way because we want to make sure that you're getting your DVDs, you're getting your 4,000 DVDs on time every month. So thank you so much for supporting Alpha Video, and check us out at oldies.com.
Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Welcome, friends. He's ignored. Action is his reward. Do you remember the 60s Spider-Man cartoon?
I am Hulk, the Hulk smash.
Oh, wow. Spider-Man is Amazing Friends.
Yes.
Did you ever watch that?
Totally.
Wah, 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 wah.
I watched that, and then Disney Plus came out, and I'm like, ooh, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends is on here. You know, I totally remember the opener and everything, and I sat down and watched it, and I'm like, what the hell happened with my life?
I watched them too.
You know, we talked about that a couple episodes ago, where memories of something is sometimes more outstanding than actually rewatching that thing, and I think that's one of those things.
Well, you know, the thing is, memory is one thing, but I think our imaginations were more powerful. I feel like our suspension of disbelief as when we were younger is so much richer, where, you know, you only need to have the suggestion of a good story, and your brain is taking it where it's filling in all those cracks and making it work. Spider-Man is one of those things that they always promised a movie, right? Even in when the Spider-Man is Amazing Friends, when the Spider-Man cartoon was on, when the 70s TV series was on, when the 80s cartoon was on, it was always like, there's going to be a movie. There's going to be a Spider-Man movie. Spider-Man movie. Superman's big. We're going to have a Spider-Man movie. It's going to be great. Spider-Man. And there was never, ever, ever a Spider-Man movie.
Canon was going to produce a Spider-Man movie, and they had the title cards, and they had treatments made up. And Marvel Comics has an issue with the actor that they cast to play Spider-Man in the canon franchise.
Footnote. The Amazing Spider-Man issue 262 did feature a photo cover of actor stuntman Scott Leva. However, while it was rumored that he was one of the actors being considered for the canon film Spider-Man, the photo cover is not a result from promoting the unmade film. Leva had done stunt and promotional work for Marvel Comics in the past. When it came around that they were going to do a photo cover for that issue, naturally, Leva was picked. The film and comic are not related aspects. Now back to the show currently in progress.
The mock-up trailer that they used to send out for, I guess, to get investors and stuff had like the title treatment and stuff like that. But the background music was from Superman, from the Christopher Reeve Superman.
Oh wow, that's crazy! Bam, 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 Spider-Man, dun, 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 dun. Spider-Man.
And then with the crash of Canon and Superman 4. Because they're supposed to be 4 and 5 were supposed to be made back to back, and 4 just pretty much shit the bed. That pretty much destroyed all chances of getting a Spider-Man in the 80s, I believe.
John Cryer killed it for them. Solar Man shit the bed for Superman 4. Lincoln logged it.
Lincoln logged it.
Yeah, that's an old industry term. Lincoln logged it.
How old? Like a couple weeks old since this revolution took over? Like nobody said that before last week.
It's the Mandela effect. Just roll with it.
Okay.
So my whole childhood and teen years reading Starlog magazine, it was always the promise of a Spider-Man movie. And then finally, the Sam Raimi versions came. And I remember thinking, speaking of canon, being very apprehensive about this idea that he would be shooting the webbing out of a hole in his wrist. I was like, they're not going to do a web shooter? And I remember just being kind of thinking that they were going to dumb it down and they weren't going to have the scientist part of Peter Parker represented, the smart side of Peter Parker represented. But then when I saw the movie, even though it didn't follow my ideas about Spider-Man, I kind of liked that first movie, and I thought that I haven't revisited it, but I definitely, it might have the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends effect, but I enjoyed that first Spider-Man movie. I enjoyed that second Spider-Man movie. The third one I felt seemed threadbare. I don't know if it was
shitting the bed.
I don't know if we needed Sandman and Venom. I think whatever the hell else they were trying to do in that. I think
the problem with the third Spider-Man movie, and it happens quite a bit. You look back through a lot of the films that do it, and especially when you start getting the sequels, even up to like modern movies, they get too into, we have to have all this in here, and there gets to be too much. So, you look at Spider-Man 3 and you had way too many characters. You look at X-Men 3 and way too many characters, way too many storylines. And even when you go back to modern stuff, my complaint is Batman versus Superman. There's way too much in there. Like, it should have, Batman should have been versing Superman. He should have been Ving the hell out of Superman. Yeah. Doomsday should not have been a part of, Doomsday should have been in its own entire movie.
Oh, yeah.
Not just crammed in the last second of it.
Well, and you already have a Superman that wants to be Batman. So, there's no dynamic. The contrast between those two characters isn't vast enough, first of all. And we barely established Superman and we were already killing him. You know what I mean? It just
You didn't even establish Batman, to tell you the truth, because Superman at least had one movie beforehand that tied in, and Batman had nothing.
Yeah, it was definitely very disappointing to try to sort of squeeze that all in there in a way that would be satisfying for fans. And then
you throw in a Wonder Woman origin as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, Wonder Woman stole the show because she was the most interesting thing in that whole movie.
But back to Spider-Man.
Yes, but back to Spider-Man, who is not Wonder Woman. Spider-Man. So I mean, you probably know more about this because you're a Marvel guy, you're a comic book guy. You know, so I'm assuming the third movie was just reviled, and then they just rebooted it, and then there was who was the guy who directed the next film, next Amazing Spider-Man.
You'll love this name.
Yes,
it's very appropriate. Mark Webber.
Wow, how could how could anyone forget? I must have never heard his name before because I feel like a Webber would be forever locked in your brain. Okay, Webber made Spider-Man, right? So, but they followed the comic books more closely in those?
They were a little bit more tighter with the comic books. They were a little bit more, they leaned more on the Gwen Stacy aspect of everything and their relationship.
Yeah, and then for people who don't know, the death of Gwen Stacy in the original comics is kind of like one of those major cornerstone kind of stories with Spider-Man. It's like Dark Phoenix story to X-Men. It's like, insert reference here in relation to other reference here. Yeah. But yeah, they did up like the more so the relationship. Not so much they didn't really lean into Mary Jane, which I assume that it had the franchise gone further, we would have gotten the Mary Jane thing. So how many movies did they make with that guy? How many did Webber do?
2.
He did 2, and Spider-Man and Raimi did 3, and both of them were kind of a mess for the same reasons, right?
Well, 2 kind of had the same problems as Spider-Man 3, where we had, they were trying to push for Sinister Six movie. So they're trying
and by who we mean what? Studio executives?
Naturally.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, they were kind of pushing for Sinister Six back with Spider-Man 3, because you kind of see that with having the inclusion of Sandman, which him at one time was a part of the Sinister Six.
I see.
And I believe they were going to shoehorn Vulture into Spider-Man 3 originally. And this one you get Rhino, he wasn't really necessarily Sinister Six, but then you get Green Goblin, a rushed origin for Green Goblin, a preview of, they walk down the halls and you can see all the stuff of that's Doc Ock's arms, that's the Goblin glider, those are the wings of the Vulture. That's so they're hinting towards that, all this stuff coming on. And then of course the inclusion of Electro as the main baddie, who wasn't really as much of a main baddie. I think they were trying to do a swerve where it's like, they're setting up Electro to be the main baddie, but here it's Peter Parker's best friend who's becoming Green Goblin, even though he was his best friend in the previous movie, and no mention of him in the previous movie. He just shows up in the sequel, and they remember all these good times. And how it's just a weird aspect where it's like, how do you forget your best friend who's in the first Amazing Spider-Man, he goes to Oscorp and he doesn't know anything about Oscorp, and it's a surprise to him, and he's intrigued by the research they're doing there. And then you go to the sequel where his best friend is the son of the guy who owns Oscorp. How the fuck does he not know about Oscorp? Right.
Yes, the story group didn't talk to each other.
But
if they even had a story group.
Yeah, and it's again back with that the thing where like sequels are kind of disjointed. They don't really mesh up very well, or that they're.
And I think a lot of times, I guess they just have another a lot of times it's a different director, but if you got the same director, I don't understand how you would be filming a scene that contradicts the last thing that you did.
Right. And I don't know if it boils down again to the favorite thing of executive meddling.
Yeah,
Or
where it's
they want
like,
too
look,
much.
this is the script we're giving you. This is the script we're shooting.
You know, this is a one villain made movie. Let's add 7 villains, and we'll make 7 times the bucks.
Because you get 7 new action figures, right?
Correct.
And seven, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
7 posters, 7 action figures. You get the giant size action figure, you get the regular size action figure. Every costume character you introduce, that's a whole line of products.
You back up that dump truck and you dump all the Lincoln Bucks as much as you can into the yard.
Yes.
You give them a shovel and you're like, just start shoveling those pennies as many as you can get.
Yep.
That's the theory.
So executive meddling ruined both those franchises, right? Both those versions of Spider-Man.
Pretty much.
And then we have this the Tom Holland Spider-Man, right? This adorable
Disney
kid.
Sony collaboration, and this is where we get to the 25% of this story.
Yes, finally getting to the 25% part of the 25% story. Yes.
So basically, the idea between Sony and Disney is that the 25% is kind of used differently in this aspect, where if either studios pull out, the characters end up, by contract, the characters get locked out of the characters. Neither Disney or Sony can make any movies with those characters moving forward as they were established. So rightfully so, you don't want to tell a direct descendant of Amazing Spider-Man from the comic books with the possibility where if this fails, well, we're both screwed out of Spider-Man, Mary Jane, Aunt May, and all the supporting cast. So the 25% change comes into effect, where if anything happens between the two companies, you're not losing story potential. So that's where we get the Spider-Man more as a Tony Stark Jr. kind of aspect.
I see.
Versus how he was in any of the other iterations of the movie, or you get. You know,
and he's got a new costume every time.
Yeah, all the time. And you got Mary Jane, or not? Yeah, you got Mary Jane who isn't Mary Jane. You got Ned who is more. He was more related to the Ultimate Universe version of Miles Morales than he was to Peter Parker. You see that all the villains are strategically different as well. Vulture, and I mean Mysterio. I mean, how amazing was Mysterio? Did you ever think you'd ever see a movie with Mysterio?
Oh man, I was so excited because I love Mysterio, and he's one of those ones that you would think they would try to sugarcoat him or make him more down to earth or less, like he is in the comics. And boy, they did not disappoint. I thought that was a cool version of Mysterio, actually.
I mean, what's your vote on the last?
Well, on Homecoming,
yes.
Spider-Man Homecoming. My thing on Homecoming is that I thought all of the acting was great. I thought a lot of the story was great. I loved Mysterio. I thought that version of Mysterio was great. They had a great way of bringing that character and the essence of that character to life in that movie. My biggest problem with Spider-Man Homecoming is that somehow it seems like it's just sort of an epilogue to Endgame, and it has a lot of like leftover threads from Endgame going into it, and then kind of setting up the next Marvel movie or the next series of Marvel movies with some of the stuff that they tacked on at the end. So I feel like
an epilogue to Endgame and a prologue to the rest of the MCU.
Right. Epilogue to Endgame and the prologue to everything else, and it didn't need that because it didn't allow it to stand on its own. And that's I think the part that I think frustrates me about that movie is because it has everything there it needs to stand on its own. Night Monkey, I mean, not just Night Monkey. It has everything to stand on its own as far as just story and character and humor and adventure, but then it doesn't stand on its own because it's sort of all integrated into this. It's so tightly integrated into movies that have already been made and movies that haven't been made yet.
Right. I mean, this is the thing I've always said about the MCU, where it's like out of like 20 films, majority of them you can watch at any time and not necessarily have to, like maybe for the exception of Endgame and like the Avengers movies themselves, majority of them you can watch and consume them as they are. You don't necessarily have to have everything before it to consume it in its entirety. You don't have to sit through 20 movies to understand one movie. Whereas this is kind of the opposite, where you kind of do have to at least know what's going on with Endgame and Infinity War to understand what's going on with Far From Home.
Yeah, and it's weird because, I mean, in the first Spider-Man movie, Peter Parker just meets Tony Stark. And in the second Spider-Man movie, he's already dead. He
died.
He died.
He died.
Yeah. Off screen? Yeah, he's dead. So, it's one of those things where it's like if you're just watching Spider-Man movies and you're watching Spider-Man for Spider-Man, there's so much that isn't there. And I feel like so many modern franchises and sub-franchises, it's like origins and deaths with nothing in between. And, it's like you're introducing characters and you're closing characters. But then if you want the whole story, you got to go all these other places to get the basic story which is the reason why you bought the ticket. You bought your ticket so you get the whole story, and the whole story isn't there, And I feel like that's to a certain degree. I feel like even though you want these movies to integrate with each other, you don't want them to integrate so tightly that the movies can't stand on their own in any way.
If you're a Spider-Man film, you should be able to consume Spider-Man without having, if you don't really care for the Avengers or anything else, you're doing yourself a disservice, because with Far From Home, you need to know what's going on. And vice versa, if you're an Iron Man film, you should be able to consume Iron Man without everything else. And yeah,
because, as a kid buying comic books, we didn't have a lot of, especially, coming from a child, not to make this sad or anything, but coming from a household of divorce, and having a situation where, I couldn't buy 50 different titles of buy every comic book that came out, and there was no internet to go steal them all. I had to pick and choose which characters I wanted to follow, and so I could just read Spider-Man because that was what I was interested in. There'd be a little flashback or a footnote from Stan Lee to sort of help me figure out where this other character came from, but it was never, at least I never felt in the stuff that I read that, I'm really missing out. I'm only getting, I'm not getting my whole Spider-Man story because I didn't buy, Moon Knight. We'll be right back with the same spider time, same spider channel with more Sleepless Nights of Insomnia.
When I was just a boy, my mother was murdered. Whatever history remembers of me, it shall be only a fraction of the truth.
So you're the one who's slain so many of my subjects.
There is a war coming.
This war
will decide whether this nation belongs to the living or the dead.
This film is not yet rated.
Welcome back, Spider Friends.
Oh, God, that is the worst Stan Lee I've ever heard. Greetings, true believers. This is your old Uncle Stan. Empty your pockets for another exciting adventure.
I mean, he's got a little list. He's got a
Spider-Man and his amazing friends. Meanwhile, back in area, 64.5, what was it?
63.75.
Meanwhile, back in area 64.75. Oh, I keep screwing it up, the number. No, too much math. So, Spider-Man...
Sleepless Nights of Insomnia.
Sleepless Nights. Sony had to keep putting out the Spider-Man movies or else they would lose the rights. And then now they're in bed with Disney and they have to keep agreeing to put out movies together or one of them could get locked out.
Yeah,
right?
Both of them would get locked out of those characters.
Both of them would get locked out.
So the 25% change is if they both get locked out of the characters, they're not out of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Which is weird because if Sony were to pull out, Disney can no longer reference like all those movies. They can't reference the characters anymore. They just drop the characters.
Yeah,
And
right.
if Disney drops out for whatever reason, and Sony, Sony has Tom Holland on he's under contract with them, so they can continue making Spider-Man movies to keep their rights issues in line.
But they have to stop referencing the Avengers and everything else.
Well, I think they have to reboot the whole damn thing for like a third time in like 5 years.
Yeah.
It's great that they have them, but then we got to go through yet another origin story.
That is really weird. That whole kind of, I can't imagine it being a creative environment to create Spider-Man stories. And it's interesting too, like how difficult it is to keep these things going that are easy, should be easy to serialize. I mean, these are adventure stories with interesting characters. We should have had 20 Spider-Man movies, all with the same Spider-Man. And for some reason, we can't get there. We can't do that. I kind of feel like with all the Ghostbusters stuff, or like with any franchise, I feel like the animated shows, and maybe because there's just less at stake, less BS, less red tape, they kind of let the animators do their job because it's already too much work to keep making changes. But you have things like the Ghostbusters cartoon. Well, first Batman, going back to Batman, the animated series has great stories and so many adventures, and it all kind of works together. And Star Wars and Clone Wars, they've got that same situation where you've got it all works together, it fits together, and then I would say even Ghostbusters, the Ghostbusters cartoon, we got to see.
Oh, the one with Tracy?
No, not that. Not the one with the gorilla.
Oh, you mean the real Ghostbusters?
The real Ghostbusters, yes. The real Ghostbusters, which I think we did a whole show about Ghostbusters on a previous Sleepless Nights. They had such a handle on, Ray and Venkman and all of those characters, Winston, and told a ton of stories, and we got to have all those adventures. And with the real Ghostbusters movie, it's like, okay, there's the first movie, which is great. And then you've got the second movie, which I guess they felt like maybe they waited a little too long to do a second movie. So they kind of told the same story again, only, 25% different.
I guess.
It's
unintentional 25%.
I don't know if it was unintentional. Maybe it wasn't. But so, you've got like, okay, now instead of a giant marshmallow man, we got the Statue of Liberty. And instead of a little bit of slime, we got a lot of slime. And instead of a guy trying to mac on Venkman trying to mac on Dana, he's trying to mac on Dana, but she's a single mom now and there's a baby. They just did the same story, but raised the stakes on everything. And so it was a good movie, but it wasn't super satisfying on a storytelling level because a lot of the elements were just, okay, they build it up from nothing again. So after the first Ghostbusters movie happens, they just sort of get sued by everyone and they just start doing birthday parties, so they didn't, we didn't get to have 100 adventures with the Ghostbusters.
Well, if Louis Tully was representing him, it's no surprise. He's a tax attorney who went to night school.
He got his law degree from night school, so they didn't get good representation. So they got sued into the Stone Age, and they're getting their ass handed to them by He-Man every afternoon.
Which is Ivan Reitman's son, who's directing the new series. He's the one that chants He-Man.
Oh, he's the one who says He-Man.
I believe
right?
so. I think so. I think that's.
So he's in that Ghostbusters movie.
Was it Jason Reitman? Is that his name?
I think that's right. Although I always feel like every famous person names their kid Max.
Yes,
but I think
that's what I almost said. That's why I had to check.
Max Spielberg and Max Landis and Max Brooks. Anyway, we've got the Ghostbusters, which I'm a big fan of that franchise.
Yeah. I mean, I would have liked to seen the Ghostbusters that had been circulating on the net that would have predated what they were pushing for the 2016, where you had a half and half team with they planned. Well, did you know that John Candy was originally supposed to play Louis Tully?
No, John
And-
Candy was going to be Louis Telly.
And then supposedly he recommended Rick Moranis to the role, and Rick Moranis ended up taking the role. But in the sequel, Candy was supposed to play a role, and Alyssa Milano was supposed to play a role as the new team.
Wow, that would have been really different. So then there would have been what, 2 teams of Ghostbusters?
2 teams, or they're training a new team. A new team. My understanding was that we would have gotten the female Ghostbusters a bit early. We would have had
a little early.
We would have had. I think it was supposed to be like a team of 2 males and 2 females.
So there would have been Janine and Alyssa Milano. Is that what you're telling me right now?
I would have accepted that.
Oh yeah, she should have always been a Ghostbuster.
She was in the cartoon, wasn't she?
I think she was in the cartoon. I think she had a pink jumpsuit. But yeah, they should have promoted Annie Potts up into the ranks. Same with Rick Moranis. I liked seeing him dressed as a Ghostbuster at the end of Ghostbusters 2. But yeah,
the accountant tax lawyer
tax lawyer / Ghostbuster.
But I don't know what the reasons are. But
why was John Candy? We don't know whether John Candy wasn't in the sequel, but he wasn't. So we didn't get that. We didn't get our female Ghostbusters.
But most of the stuff that I read was like the River of Slime still existed and so on and so forth. I mean, this is a lot of hearsay, so who knows if it's actually true or not.
So who knows, fan theory or reality or Mandela effect, you decide. Right. So that brings us to the 2016 Ghostbusters, which I really wanted to like.
Oh, you're not the only one. I mean, Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon. I love all those actresses. Where can you go wrong? I mean, I love what's the name of the damn movie? I love it so much I forgot the name of the movie.
Yes, that movie you love.
That movie that I love. It's the same director as Ghostbusters 2, and it stars Kristen Wiig, and it is the.
I don't know. I know that it's a Bridesmaids.
Bridesmaids. Thank you.
Bridesmaids is the movie you're thinking of. I've not seen Bridesmaids. All of those actresses are very funny, and
yes.
and if they just said, well, these are just the funniest people that we found, and we thought that they'd be great Ghostbusters, I feel like, that would be good enough for me. But I do feel like I don't know if it was necessarily a feminist agenda, but definitely trying to target a market of this is the Ghostbusters for girls. The boys can stay home, right? I mean, is that what you're feeling about that movie?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I feel. I mean, I felt like they were marketing on the gender of the characters, and to me, it's like I'm a story first kind of person. So It doesn't really matter who's in that lead role, whether it's male, female, potted houseplant.
What kind of plumbing they have under their jumpsuit.
Yeah, and if they have plumbing, and if the proper plumbing is plumbing.
Yeah, so who's a plumber? And we're all plumbers, and we've all got the same plumbing. And some people have their plumbing on the inside, and some people have their plumbing on the outside.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, you tell a good story, it doesn't really matter who that main character is. In comparison, where it's like you got Ellen Ripley, which is a great character.
Oh yeah.
You've got Sarah Connor.
Sarah Connor from Terminator, and even in Mad Max, I thought Fury Road. I thought she was interesting and cool.
Right, and even up to Captain Marvel, but I don't feel that any of those things. I think when we came to Ghostbusters, it was like I feel like the drum they were banging was the wrong drum, where it's like the fans just wanted a Ghostbusters 3. That's all they wanted. They wanted their old characters back. They wanted to play in the sandbox again. And what they kind of got was, well, F you, we're going to do our own thing, and girl power and all this other stuff. And it's like, you can have like I said, you can have Ellen Ripley, you can have, Sarah Connor, you can have Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. Why can't we have a Ghostbusters team and the original team? Like, why did we have to get rid of one just to have the other?
Yeah, and I feel like it shows a bit of I feel insecurity to they felt like they had to erase the other guys entirely in order for those characters to stand on their own. And, I think that wouldn't have necessarily been so, I mean, I think that it would have. They had those actors in that movie anyway. They had the original actors in the ones that were still alive. Mm-hmm. In that movie anyway. The original Ghostbusters has such a great premise of, we could franchise this out. And the other reality is all those guys are getting old.
Right. We're not going to get any more films with those guys.
We're not getting any younger. And maybe sometimes the best man for the job is a woman. And if they had played it like that, I think people would have really appreciated it, But I feel like that some part of me feels like it's that 30% difference in there, that the girl power thing was just a subterfuge, that wasn't really sincere, that it was just like, okay, how do we make this an entirely new thing that we control? We don't have to pay any of the old. We can undercut anybody else who was connected to it. We got new outfits, a new car, a new logo,
new weapons.
Everything is. I guess they don't have a new logo. They do have the original logo. That's the only thing they did kept. But I guess the Ghostbusters 2 logo was 20% different than the original Ghostbusters logo. So now we turned it 20% back again. But the whole idea is that they have a whole, with eliminating those original characters, I think they felt like they could keep more of the pie for themselves, and that they could maybe have not feel obligated to serve that audience anymore because they already have their money. We already have your money, Ghostbusters fans. There's a whole other market of people that we don't have their money yet, and we feel like we can use this brand to get their money. And I think that I think is the issue. And I think there's a very kind of pragmatic, greedy force behind a lot of it, where it's like, okay, well, young boys are lost to video games. Girls spend a lot of money. We want that female dollar, and we're going to pander to them and try to get that. We're going to make every franchise safe for girls. We're going to make horror safe for girls. We're going to make Doctor Who safe for girls, Star Wars safe for girls. Not that it needs to be safe for girls, because girls always loved horror. Girls always loved Star Wars, but there's this pandering there where they've got a target. Their marketing people have got that sniper rifle aimed right at the head of that young girl with expendable income, and they want that money. They want that money that they would have been, you used to spend that money on lipstick, but now you don't even leave the house. You just watch TV and movies. So we want your money. We want you to spend that money on that expendable income on us and on our franchise.
Not that you could leave the house because the apes.
The Abes.
Sorry, the Abes.
The Abes, yes. You get chopped down like a cherry tree if you go outside. So you got to stay inside.
Isn't that George Washington?
Oh, right. That is George Washington.
And I'm the one with 25% less brain.
Yeah, well, I had my lobotomy
you had your Lobo-otomy?
I think 2 episodes ago I already had my lobotomy, so... But, I do think that there is a targeting of young girls because I do feel, by movies and television and specifically, because I do feel like boys, and this is stereotype too. We're still stereotyping and being sexist because this is how marketing people think. We've lost all the boys to video games for good. And so... the only people who are buying toys are young girls and their dads. So that I feel is that where they screwed up with Ghostbusters 3 is that they screwed the dads. They threw the dads under the bus. They went right for the girls. It's like someone coming to date your daughter, right? You know, if they don't even like shake your hand and look you in the eye, you know, they're just waiting outside honking the horn, and they just want your daughter. Mm-hmm. That's what I feel like the Ghostbusters 2, the Ghostbusters 3 movie did.
Well, I mean, I want to reiterate, you know, because I have daughters, and you know, I want them to enjoy the things that I like, and I want them to have characters that reach, you know, that speak to them. They saw the 2016 Ghostbusters, and they didn't relate to it. They didn't like it. Versus like Captain Marvel, and they're like, yeah, I'm into this and stuff. But then, you know, they're into Doctor Strange. You know, they don't have to turn Doctor Strange into a female character. They enjoy that character too. Like, so, you know, I guess it boils down to like the marketing, where it's like, we gotta slice and dice this down to the smallest molecule. But it's like, my kids relate to whatever, you know, they like the things that I like and stuff like that. They like the things that they can relate to, but they also like the other things too. And they don't really necessarily want or need to be pandered to.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, there were all sorts of characters that I loved. That I mean, going back to Spider-Man, I mean, I loved the Spider-Man cartoon, but honestly, the Spider-Woman cartoon I liked even more than the Spider-Man cartoon. You know, Jessica Drew shooting those plasma rays all over the place. I was running around the house shooting plasma rays out of my hands like Spider-Woman, and it wasn't like, you know, I can't identify with this character because it's a female, or I'm not seeing myself represented on the screen, so I can't, you know, be into it. You know, when we used to play, you know, Battlestar Galactica, you know, I would want to be, you know, a character, any of those characters. I'd want to be Starbuck, even though I'm not blonde, you know. And you know, you have your friends going, oh no, you should be, you know, Muffy the Daggett, because you're brown, you know, or whatever, you know. It's like, I don't want to be that character, you know. I want to be Starbuck, you know. And it's like when they did the Star Trek episode Naked Time, when they were all living their fantasies, you know, in the script, George Takei was supposed to be a samurai, but George Takei didn't want to be a samurai when he was a kid. He wanted to be Errol Flynn. Just because he's Asian doesn't mean that he's just gonna identify with the samurai, you know. And I feel like, you know, that's a good analogy here, where if you have a character that's engaging and a character that is a hero and is someone who you'd want to be, maybe isn't someone who you already are, but someone who on the inside is who you identify with them because they're the kind of person you'd like to be, not because they are your same gender or your same race or come from the same place you do or make the same kind of money that you do, right?
And to dial back a little bit and make a Ghostbusters and a Spider-Man connection, the same creative team that was behind Ghostbusters, or the same executive behind Ghostbusters, was behind the awesome the Spider-Verse movie.
Oh, wow.
And had a well-written female character, not only as a hero, but they had a well-written villain female character, you know? And they didn't have to pander. They didn't have to dumb everybody down. They did the best that they could to honor the source material, and you get that, and you get a person of color as the main character too, right? As Spider-Man.
You have a mixed race Spider-Man, Miles Morales, who, again, you know, I mean, I'm a brown kid. I was a brown kid. I mean, I would have been great if Spider-Man was brown, but, you know, I loved being Peter Parker. When Peter Parker was a white kid, I was still jumping around the house pretending to be Spider-Man, you know? So it's not like for being a brown kid, I don't need Spider-Man to be brown to love Spider-Man, but it is awesome to see that representation. And it's not that Miles Morales is a great Spider-Man because he's brown. He's just a great kid, and a good kid with a good heart, and he should be Spider-Man. You know,
good morals.
Good morals. Morales, yes.
Morales.
And you know, and the thing is that Doc Ock was great. The female Doc Ock was great, and
Gwen Stacy.
Gwen Stacy was great. Yeah, I mean, all of those characters.
And all these characters exist. You know, these came from, you know, a source material. I think that even the female Doc Ock was from a version of the Ultimate Spider-Man universe. So it's not like they had to create something fresh for a group or just kind of, do that typical, we're just going to gender swap this character and, instantly we've got new chemistry. This is Paul from the future. I had to time jump into the past to fix a major incident that has dire consequences on your future. Just a moment ago, I said that the female Doc Ock, or otherwise known as Olivia Liv Octavius, was from the comics. This is untrue. While a female version of the character did come out in the 90s, this specific character was created for the film to further hammer the idea of an alternate reality interpretation of characters from the Spider-Man universe. Whew. Crisis averted. Now which button sends me back? That movie knocked it out of the park for all of us. I enjoyed it. My kids enjoyed it,
Right. I enjoyed it. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like they honored, and that's the thing too, is that they did the thing that the Star Trek did with the Kelvin timeline, where it's like they've got these parallel universes to where you can enjoy this Spider-Man, but this doesn't take away any other version of Spider-Man. In fact, it embraces every version of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just getting choked up because I saw the Spider-Man the toy car that I had as a kid, which doesn't fit into anything. Spider-Man should never drive a spider car, but I had that spider car, and there it was, And the animated, the old animated Spider-Man, and all of the Peter Parker Spider-Man, and the 30s Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm. And the Spider-Man 2099, which you never would think would ever appear in a movie ever.
No,
that was kind of so obscure.
The Japanese manga inspired, anime inspired Spider-Man. I mean, it was interesting because you have this thing where it is totally accepting all of this canon from so many different places. But not watering down the story to the point of, well, I don't even know what this is about, and I don't even know who this character is. If for somehow in some way they did all of the things that you would think would be impossible, do something different that hasn't been done before, have something that looks and feels different than what's done before, but then somehow embraces the soul and the spirit and the excitement of that character, Spider-Man, in a way that's satisfying for fans of old Spider-Man, current Spider-Man, and whatever the next generation of kids who like Spider-Man. But then it's also animated. So again, that goes back to the thing: what is it about animation that I guess they have to really have their script tight before they even start?
I mean, animation's a different animal than live action, because isn't animation voiced first and then animated? So they have to have
typically it's
tight.
Voiced first. Yeah, so you have to have it completely written before any animation is created. So I guess we've gone full circle, right? If we done our due diligence, can we wrap this up? Are we 25%? Over time now?
I think we're 25%. Yeah, we're the episode is 25% more.
Okay, we're good. Then we're 25%. We've fulfilled our obligation of making this 25% different than a typical episode.
Does that make us a king size in the world of candy? We would be a king size episode.
Yeah, we're not fun size. Maybe economy size.
Yeah.
Yeah, economy size,
usually
family size.
Because don't they usually have 25% more chocolate?
Yeah. I don't know which constitutes what economy size versus family size. Fun size is always smaller, though.
Right. Because you can't have too much fun.
No, just a little bit. And we've had enough fun now, so we're going to wrap this up. Thank you for listening to the Sleepless Knights of Insomnia.
You have been listening to the Sleepless Knights podcast, or should we say, pODDcast.
pODDcast.
Emphasis on the odd. Our theme is by Mars Homeworld at Dead House Music. Our opening announcement is by Ophelia Necro. She does a radio show called Suicide Watch. And you could reach Mr. Lobo at cinemainsomnia.com, or find me on YouTube, YouTube/Mr. Lobo. Misterlobo. Mr. Lobo on Facebook, Facebook.com/mr.lobo, or on Twitter, at Mr. Lobo, MisterLobo.
Or you can find myself, Paul Sanders, or better known as Bestow TV, at Bestow.tv, on YouTube /Bestow TV, on Twitter at Bestow Prod, PROD, and on Facebook, Bestow TV.
If you want to place an advertisement with this podcast, and gosh, why wouldn't you? We could be talking about you right now. Contact us, Mr. Lobo at cinemainsomnia.com. That's MRLOBO @CINEMAINSOMNIA.com. Or support us on Patreon. Patreon supporters get to hear this podcast before anyone else and a lot of other great stuff, right, Paul?
Sure.
Doesn't get it better than that, right? So come join the fun at
Patreon.com/Sleepless Knights Podcast.
That's
Patreon.com/Sleepless Knights Podcast.
Please stay up with us next week for another Sleepless Knights podcast. Or should we say, pODDcast.
Podcast.
The best thing about being an insomniac is never having to say goodnight.
Good night.